Thank you all for joining us here again for our FASD monthly webinar. Tonight, we're delighted to welcome Andrew Fox, who Andrew and I have known each other for many, many years. And I think a true professional in every respect. Andrew, can I ask you to tell us a little bit about your experience in the field of foster care and child protection? You've got quite a lengthy and well-known history behind it. So can you give us some of your experience?
Well, what I won't do is call myself an expert like you just did, because I think that's dangerous stuff. I've got years of experience. I've been qualified for just about 40 years and spent the first 18, 20 years really focusing on children and families, child protection in South Yorkshire, as you can tell from the accent, and moved down here about 29 years ago and stepped into the same format. And then moved from that into fostering and became the manager for quite a large part of therapeutic fostering agency, which as I started, most people left. I don't know what they'd heard about me. So we built from scratch and employed somewhere in the region of about 25 different therapists at any given time over that company, speech and language therapists. And I opened an EBD MLD school and ran a farm, just something to do at the same time so that the kids could benefit from that. And we developed services from there, including some weird and wacky stuff like horses and riding of horses for the children and whatever works to be able to get the children to feel comfortable. And then within that, started to notice that one or two of the young people we were looking at didn't quite add up. And we were trying to work out what that was. And within that, started to hear about fetal alcohol syndrome and clocked that there was a conference in York. And when I arrived, what I didn't realise until I got there, I was the only social work background person there. They were all paediatricians, and it was hot off the block, as it were. It was just starting to, a lot of the research and people who came out to speak were from Canada. A lot of the research had been from Canada.
That's right.
Initially, and it was new. It was new to the paediatricians, and very interesting to see how people were trying to work out the size of it, really, which I still don't think people have got to grips with, and B, how to deal with these young people and the wiring issues in the brain that's caused by fetal alcohol syndrome. So I got involved at that stage, and to be honest, I think I must over the years have worked with carers with not that many, but I would think about 8 young people with fetal alcohol syndrome over the years.
One of the areas as working with a fostering agency, one of the biggest subjects which we're going to be covering tonight is allegations. I remember when my wife and I, we were brand new to fostering. It started with this choosing to foster course, which was a warts and all course. And I remember by day 3 in this course, we'd been given a pretty detailed explanation of what we were going to be looking at and what we were going to have to live with if we were going to go down the road of fostering. By day 3, our instructor informed us that potentially we could lose half of the group when we spoke about allegations, because it was such a serious part of fostering. Can you tell us, first of all, what is an allegation?
Well, an allegation an allegation can come directly from a young person who's saying clearly to people, I've been abused. I'm not saying they would say I've been abused, but it may be sexual, it may be physical. They would, of course, be maybe at school that they're telling somebody or a friend. And it's then down to the officials to try and work out if there's any truth in that allegation. And that is where the crux of the problem can lie, because unfortunately, young people can make allegations for various reasons. They can make allegations because they are being abused, and people do come into our industry and misuse their positions, and we've got to be open to that. And we must always take seriously an allegation, but it's about how you investigate that allegation. And at the moment, the people who investigate an allegation are social services, social workers, NSPCC, and the police. Normally, when I used to manage these situations, we'd have a between my investigating social workers, myself chairing it, and the relevant police officers. And quite quickly, if they didn't feel there's going to be a prosecution at the end of it, the police quite often would step out. And I worked hard on them not to do that, because the other side, the end of the allegation being investigated, obviously it can end up with somebody being prosecuted or stop fostering or stop parenting. It's against parents as well, don't forget. But if you're a parent or a foster carer and you've had an allegation made against you, it's not good enough just for people to say, oh, well, we've not found it, because it's then left hanging. And it's left hanging on people that they have to live with all their lives. So I think it's important that people come to a conclusion and say, there's no evidence to support this allegation. And I think that doesn't happen enough, to be honest, and it leaves a mark against people for the rest of their careers.
Absolutely, there is absolutely a stigma that is attached to it. So let's go through the process. An allegation is made, and it could be against any member of the family. It could be against anyone within the network of support and care within that family network. What would be the process then?
If an allegation is raised by anybody, you've got a duty to inform the local authority social services. And what people don't realise is, Childline, for instance, if somebody phones Childline and makes an allegation, they do not investigate. They pass it to social services at the earliest opportunity. At that point, people will start to do some checks, whether people who's known, what's known. There'll be some background checks with the school of the young person, for instance, or the health visitor, or trying to get information in about, because this child may never be known, or the carers or parents. And then there's what we call a strategy meeting called, which is what I've just alluded to, where people like myself would chair that, and within that, we'd be pulling all that information onto the table and saying, right, what do we know? And I used to use all the W's. Who's making the allegation? What are they saying? What are the symptoms? Where's the evidence? Is there any evidence? Why now? Why is it being said now? Is it a new allegation that only happened yesterday? Did it happen 12 months ago, 4 years ago? Because you'd be surprised. Some of the, people can say things and say, oh, this happened to me 15 years ago. And you're thinking, well, why now? Why are you bringing it to us now? So it really is trying to pull all that together and then making a decision as to who, how do we step forward? Do we interview the child? Do the police need to be involved in interviewing the child? And we have specialists, there's all around the country, the specialist places, because we, even as a social worker in the 80s, we used to video interview, because you've got to minimise the damage as well. You're trying to find out what's happening with causing as little damage as possible to an already difficult situation. So you don't want to, and you've got to be trained to be able to work with children, because you don't want to be putting things into their minds and giving them things to say. You want to be listening to what they're saying and then trying to corroborate what they're saying. So that's the difficult area.
What's the time frame generally in, let's say an allegation comes in, what is proposed as the right sort of time frame to come to a conclusion?
Well, therein lies the problem, Andrew. I don't think, and that's been looked at recently by the government and by civil servants and some of the experts, because it's just been dragging on. So you can have a foster care. And one of the other things, I would say 9 times out of 10, if not more, that when an allegation is made against a foster carer, the children are removed.
Yeah. And as far as I understand as well, we have a situation where around 85% of carers continue fostering. This is a key finding from 2022. And 55% of carers that were offered support on the day were told that they were offered support on that day. 40% of carers were not offered independent support. And, these are findings from the Fostering Network's reports back in 2022. So there's a procedure in place that it should be followed.
Well, the procedure at the moment not work. There's no ifs or buts about it. Most of the children, the high percentage of the children are moved immediately because the decision on what happens with the child who's making the allegation is made by the manager and the social worker of the team that are responsible for the child's care order. Well, quite often they will say, we'll remove the children while the investigation takes place. And then, of course, if it's not found, then we can look at whether they go back or not again. The majority never return.
Yeah.
And in fact, that is hot news today, this last fortnight, that they are looking clearly at that, because at the moment we have what they call a LADO system. Each local authority has to have a LADO, and if it's an allegation against a carer or a member of staff, it has to go to the LADO, and they are responsible for overseeing it. They are taking away from the LADO system for foster carers. They're saying it should be just looked at like any other allegation, and they are also going to say that there's got to be a meeting to look at the investigation immediately, and within that meeting, so that everybody's involved, should be a discussion as to whether it's in the child's interest to be moved from that placement. What are the safety issues? Is it really that bad that the child has to be moved out? They're trying to prevent the child always being moved, and to give a broader feel for making that decision with more information rather than a knee-jerk. The child said that about the carer getting. I mean, I have to be honest. I've had lots of times when a child has been told by birth parents, or they've had a falling out within the foster home, and will make statements to make things happen that they feel at that moment in time they want to happen. They want to move from that placement, and if that's what they've got to do to achieve that. And I've had many children in tears afterwards, regretting what they've done. But the difficult for professionals is, within all that, are some children being abused by carers or members of staff or teaching staff or whoever, and it's working that bit out. It's trying to work that bit out in the safest possible way and the best way, first and foremost, for the child or young person. And to bear in mind, this is people with careers, and people care passionately about children sometimes. And if you get a false allegation and we're losing good carers, then that's not right either. So it is a real balancing job.
Absolutely. And can you tell us, let's say, the interview process itself, how is that carried out? So first of all, is it the local authority? Is it the foster agency's social worker? Who carries out the interview process?
Well, within the strategy meeting, it will be decided who's the best person to be able to actually interview the child. It would normally be, most of the time, it would be the investigating social worker from the local authority where the child resides or where the allegation was. That's who would normally see the child. But when we're talking about children with special needs or fetal alcohol, one of the things for me is, who is the best person to talk to that child? Who knows that child best? Who understands? Some of the social workers who work for me were absolutely brilliant at talking to children and listening to, well, I say talking, I should be saying listening to children, because we should not be doing a lot of talking. We should be getting them to share with us what they have to say, so that we can look at it. We're not in the ball game of telling them what to say. But it's very difficult. It's difficult anyway with any young person. It's difficult when they're younger or what age they are. And then if you put into the mix that they've got special needs, it's really, really difficult. And it makes it difficult if the allegations about the person who knows the child best, I suppose. How do you square that circle is what I would say to everyone. It really is a complex issue. And what you've got to do is you're asking about the time frames, and I think you're right to ask about that. But these things can't be rushed either, because you really have to think and get it right and make sure you give the child the best opportunity to share and you hear what they're saying without steering. But, there is a time issue, because slippage can make it worse.
And it brings up the subject we've had on here, Dr. David Gilbert, who's a specialist in confabulation. Confabulation is also an area that we've spoken with Maggie May, one of our lived experience FASD adults. And it's a really serious subject when it comes to allegations. And confabulation is, as many will know and from seeing the webinars, it's where the brain actually picks up parts of the information, where with brain damage caused by fetal alcohol spectrum disorders and prenatal alcohol, what happens is the brain will only pick out certain bits of information, but it will actually create from certain facts an entire story that is compelling and totally believable to that individual. And so therefore it might not be the entire picture. Now, they will believe emphatically that what they have said is the truth. But for other people, that will be seen as direct lying. Of course, it's actually provable now as well. In the same situation, we're also dealing with suggestibility. And that's where you were coming from, about how you listen or ask appropriate questions and wait appropriate length of time for a response, because this whole fight or flight mode, with suggestibility, many individuals with FASD and with other learning difficulties in a fight or flight mode will tell you what you want to hear. And so therefore, you come into a very difficult position when an allegation is made, because it might be hearsay from somebody else. So, for example, they might be on respite. We've been dealing with families, a lot of our families who, and the reason we're putting an allegation webinar on now is because we're managing families that are dealing with allegations all the time. And the subject of confabulation and suggestibility comes up quite often, because if they are mentioning that they were in a swimming pool, for example, here's an example. This isn't a true story. It's just an example. They were in a swimming pool and they were saying that somebody touched them inappropriately in the swimming pool. And they picked up a story because they've heard somebody else use the word inappropriately. And then this story develops, it becomes a safeguarding issue in the school. And rightly so, it should be investigated. I don't deny that at all. But when you picked up on the point there about having the right person that knows that individual and knows the disability, also understands confabulation and suggestibility, that becomes a really important part of it, because in the meantime, the family are all questioning each other, aren't they? Because you're going to say, okay, so let's say the birth son, a sibling, picked up that child inappropriately in the swimming pool and happened to touch them in a way that they felt was inappropriate. And they've just heard this phrase. How would you, in that situation, manage the interview process effectively?
Well, I think when you're talking to a child, it's open questions. What do you mean by inappropriate? What happened? You go away from the use of language to description of facts. What happened? How did they touch you? What was happening when they touched you? If you wouldn't start by saying how did. You'd be saying, what are you saying to me? Well, they touched me inappropriately. Well, what does that mean? What was inappropriate? How did they touch? It's all the open questions you would only ever ask. Open questions. And at the end of the day, you'd also, who else was in the pool, who was around, who saw anything. It's a proper investigation. I don't want to take us into Cagney and Lacey and all that nonsense, but it really should be at that level that you're trying to get. I used to see it as a jigsaw, and you need as many pieces of the jigsaw to be able to read the picture. Because if you've got a piece missing or one or two pieces from that's been thrown in the box from a different jigsaw, you ain't seen the proper picture. So that what I used to talk to staff about that all the time, about make sure you're getting as many pieces of that jigsaw. Has there been arguments in the house? You'll give an example about a birth son. How do they get on in the home? Have they got on over the last few weeks? Was there a problem yesterday? Because you really are trying to work out, and you've got to be able. What bothers me, and what always bothered me, and used to argue about this, is the police in that situation will say, "Oh, we ain't going to get anywhere in a court of law, so we're going to back off." But social services have not got to prove it to a court of law to the same level.
Yeah.
So what they're trying to do is, and it's complex, but you've got to be cautious and you've got to be safety. But sometimes you can do more damage by being too safe, and therein lies the crux, really, and the problem for everybody. And I think that's been looked. Well, I know that's live. It's been looked at yet again after all these years, and that's why there's these different attitudes coming forward. It's when I came to Kent, for instance, they used to have the child protection register if children are seen at risk. And when I came to Kent, Maidstone area, I think there were 68 young people on the child protection register. And I said, well, I hardly had any on my register in Barnsley, in a really rough area of South Yorkshire. How can you warrant 68? But what was happening is that people were calling the child protection conference because they were concerned about a child being at risk. And it was easy for people around the table, because doctors, nurses, any school teachers, you've saved the child by putting your hand up and saying this child's at risk. And then there's got to be a care plan, and there's got to be a protection plan, and people have got to work with it. But actually, not all those children needed to be on a child protection register. So you're wasting resources, and you're putting a family through the mill. So that's not to do with what we're on about today, but I'm using it as an example to show that you really have got to be clear and careful about how you make these decisions, because by being safety first, and I was always anxious to get it right, but by being safety first, you can do more damage. And I think, when you're talking about some of these young people with fetal alcohol syndrome, working out what they've actually lived through is very, very complex and very difficult. And it makes it even more difficult if the person that the allegation's about is the person who knows them best, who can communicate with them best. I accept that.
And what support is put in place immediately for the foster family?
Well, that depends who you work for, where you live, where you work. most foster families are supported by a fostering network, and they are there, and certainly the company that I'm involved with at the moment pay fostering network annual, so much a year, so that they're there to support. But they've gone into a lot of research and things. And quite honestly, I've got loads of carers who don't even work for me anymore over the last 6 years, who I've not seen for years, phone me up for advice and guidance because they're not getting that support. And a lot of people walk away. They walk away from the industry because it's easier. It's easy to say, well, if that's what you're saying about me, sod it, I'm off. Well, we can't afford to lose foster carers like that, quite honestly, because the children miss out. I know, I can guarantee you, because I know from the last few years, some really experienced quality carers who had not massive allegations either. They don't have to be massive allegations. They can be simple things that could be sorted out. It's just. I mean, I've just been dealing with some carers who currently work for me, and 8 years ago they had an allegation. The local authority insisted that the children were removed while they were investigated. I said that was nonsense. The allegations didn't add up to that. The social worker insisted the children were moved, and then they refused to put them. It wasn't found, and then they refused to put them back.
Mm.
I mean, it ended up in a court of law with the local authority having to pay the children £9,000 a piece because they'd abused them by removing them from their permanent foster placement. And they did go back, and they're still there to this day.
Yeah.
And I think, you've got to bear these things in mind. You've got to look at all angles, I believe.
Absolutely. We've got a question that's come in on that subject. Is the clarity about the evidential thresholds required in allegations? Who makes the judgment? And do the investigators make the judgment? Is this not an inherent risk in investigators being involved in decisions and judgments?
I would say I would concur. Certainly, it was down to people like me to make that decision as to whether it was found or not, and that was fed back into the fostering services what we felt were happening. And at the moment, recently over the last few years, the LADO has made that decision, has overseen the process, chaired the meetings, and made that decision as to whether it's found or not. Where's your right to appeal? It's not like a court case where you've got a jury or a judge and a right to appeal. How many people in fostering would appeal if they think this is nonsense? Where do you take it? And then, of course, what actually happens then is quite often at that point, it goes back to the agency that carers are working for, and they have to do an investigation and look and talk to the carers and look at it all, and it goes back to panel. And then it's the decision makers' decision as to whether they continue to foster or not. And I suppose the only right of appeal they've got in that situation is to take it to Birmingham and say, I've been dismissed as a foster carer unreasonably. Well, I've never heard of them overturning one where a carer has been stood down because they've had an allegation.
I've got another question here, which is around the policies, allegation policies. Does every foster agency or local authority have to have an allegation policy and process in place? And is there anyone that moderates that? Who checks those?
The policies and procedures are usually led by what I've just been explaining, that the local authority for the area where the carers live, it's their job to investigate alongside the police any allegations. So the policies and procedures, I mean, firstly, everybody has to do child protection training, carers, teachers, everyone, myself. And some of the training is appalling. I've got to be honest with you. I mean, I complained about one local authority's training that I sat through because there was a statements like, one of the questions was, would you put a 14-year-old in the back of your car? And I said, and transport them? And I said, yes, I would. And they said, no, that's the wrong answer. This is on a child protection training course. And I said, well, I don't think it is the wrong answer.
Yeah.
Because me not being able to, I've spent a life transporting young people and taking them to contact or taking them to court or whatever, or taking them to a secure placement at times. Who's going to take them if I don't take them? I don't know. Anyway, so yes, but that's whose responsibility it is. So the agencies' policies and procedures will be very veered towards that. Their statements will be really that everybody has to hear if a child makes an allegation, and has to inform their social worker or agency immediately if they get any knowledge. Who'll then have to run it to who'll then have to make a decision to take it to the LADO and to the social worker for the child, because obviously they're holding the care order. They are in parental responsibility, so it's taken back to them, and it's quite often the social worker for the child and their managers who decide, whether it's taken forward to the LADO or not. It depends on the level of the allegation. A low level one, it may be that they're saying, well, the agency should go. Can you go out and talk to the carer and find out what's going on? But once they go past that level, then it's at the LADO. Then the LADO takes over. I mean, they are going to take. I say again, I'm hearing very clearly this last fortnight, especially yesterday, that they are going to take it out of that system, and it will be dealt with like any other. So carers will not be dealt with like a member of staff. For instance, if it were me, an allegation were against me, then I'd expect that to be a LADO really, because it's quite it's a different level.
That's an interesting point. We've got Tracy on board. Hi, Tracy.
Hiya.
I'm going to move the mic over to Tracy. Tracy, as a foster carer, as somebody that's working with supporting families with FASD that are in the care system, when you offer support, what is the impact on the families? Let's look at the real life, the lived experience impact, because I think it's important for social workers. It's important for all those professionals that are looking at the interviewing process. Tell us about the experience for those families.
Some of the experience, I couldn't even write the book, if I'm being absolutely honest. The feedback, the devastation, how fragmented it is. And, I've had situations where families are experiencing children not coming home from school, and they have not been notified because they've said something at school. Safeguarding steps in, and the parents are sitting at home, foster parents or adoptive parents, waiting for them to come home, and they don't know where their child is, not come back on the bus, and no one's communicating anything to them. They're whisked off into emergency respite. They haven't even been asked what's gone on from their perspective. They're not really getting the support that they need. And it's very, very concerning, especially for our young people who see the world differently, and their communication styles are different, and they might verbalize something that is something that within the family network could be a normal sentence that everyone in the family know what they're talking about, but to somebody that doesn't understand FASD, doesn't understand, like Andrew said, their past traumas, everything else, then they've picked up on it in school, quite rightly, because obviously if there's something concerning, they need to pick up on it. But then it's raised so quickly to a level where there's no, what I would call real, not investigation, but like unpicking in a way that you would hope that the family could have somebody come in and unpick it with them and find out what maybe has gone on. And then somebody that has a knowledge of FASD to be able to sit with that child and unpick what they're saying, maybe look at communication styles, an advocate, somebody, but they need to understand FASD and how to communicate with somebody and use different, styles of communication.
Can I have a look also, because we've had a question, a point brought up here around a question mark with the local authority talking about birthmarks, existing birthmarks. I've been in the situation myself where a foster child in the past, we've been fostering for over 20 years, as Andrew well knows. And we've had a situation where a young man had bruises down his legs. Now, he was one of these children that would be jumping out of trees, slide into tackles, and would get marks all the time. And one of the things that I always recommend, or we recommend within our fostering networks and within our family support groups, is about the documentation of your diaries and evidence taking, making notes of all these situations. So, for example, if there are birthmarks, if there is any change to a birthmark that you've noticed, or any bruising on the arm, or an accident that might have happened, to record it in your diaries. That's something
that's brilliant for foster carers, but adoptees don't and birth families don't. That's the difference, isn't it, Andrew? You know, like you've with us as carers, it is a different role in some respects. So we do have to sort of be accountable, evidence-based, and you know, write our daily logs. And if there was anything else like a disclosure and whatever, there's processes in place that we know what to do as carers and who to escalate it to. So, but when you're an adoptee or a birth member, and then, you know, you're just living your life and you're getting on with it, that devastation of when all of a sudden there is an accusation, it's traumatic, and I know people that are still trying to get over those allegations many years down the line. You know, these are professional people, these are, you know, people that aren't professional, and you know, it's really hard for them to be able to comprehend not only the way that their child has been treated within the whole process, but them as a family, how, you know, it could be dealt with a lot more
holistically.
holistically, yeah, and also in a more person-centered way.
Can I just read a quote here? This is from the 2024 Independent Foster Carers Survey Report, and it says, "The fear of allegations significantly impacts foster carers' mental health and their ability to perform their duties. Over 80% of carers indicated that this fear affects their role, and an alarming 85% believe allegations are not handled fairly, justly, or in a balanced way. Despite long-standing concerns raised by many, these issues are often dismissed due to lack of evidence, with the severity of allegations remaining hidden." In your experience, Andrew, just a rough example of percentage, how many allegations do you find are not followed through or are seen to be false allegations?
In 20 years, given that over a period of a year, I would say we'd be looking at dealing. This is while I've been on the fostering side. I've been looking at dealing with, say, 20 to 30 allegations a year. That's my own personal areas. And in 20 years, I would say to you that 2 were definitely factual abusive situation.
And in that situation,
and can I just want to quickly say that on one of those, as soon as I heard the allegation, I thought there's something in this.
that was going to be my point.
And normally, in my last agency, we used to have fostering advisors. We were experienced foster carers whose job it was to support the carer. And I took those carers, fostering advisors, to one side and said, "You will not be doing that role with this carer." And I knew that they were going to be really angry at me. And let me tell you, they were really angry at me. And I put in I pulled a top social worker that I had a lot in, because I knew that when that advisor knew what the allegation was, they were going to really struggle to support that family. And it's important for me that the family is supported to the max until that allegation is proven. And that allegation was proven.
Right. That's a scary statistic there, I feel. And, you know,
that's a statistic. I can't say that. I can only go on my experience. The great majority. But also, don't forget, it's a continuum. We're talking about he pushed me, he shoved me, I fell over and bruised myself because they pushed me or whatever to severe sexual abuse or whatever. But luckily, I may have been lucky in my professional career that people may say, well, you've been blind to it, but I've not investigated all these. I've been in charge of the fostering side on these. This is after I've done my investigation career, which was the start of my career. So, I've not been blind to it because it's not been my decisions.
And with that experience that you've got, you've sort of alluded to it on several occasions today, but if we were to look at what you would feel would be the most appropriate method of investigating an allegation, what would be the procedure that you would encourage as a policy moving forward?
Well, I think that the social workers, I can only speak for my own agency, who know the carers and the children should be more involved in the investigation, because they're taken out of the picture. They are taken out of the picture. It's exactly the same investigation in foster care as it is for a teacher or for a parent. And I think when we've got people who are equally professional social workers, who know, I personally think that they should be more involved in that. I'm pleased to see that they're taking it away from the laddo. There's been some really good laddos making really great decisions, so I'm not being critical of them. But the whole process seems to be finding carers guilty before they're looked at. And I think we're moving away from that. And it's about, the reason I'm saying that about some of the social workers in agencies, if you've got good social workers in a good agency, they will have a relationship with the children. I cannot see how you can go into a foster family's home and not build up a relationship with everybody in that home. Andrew, you know that I've never accepted my staff saying, well, I don't really know the birth children. I may be nosy as a person. I want to know what Andrew's doing, what his wife's doing, what the kids are doing. I've always wanted to know. It's part of the picture. I want to know the people I'm working with and get thrills from the successes as well, and support when things are going wrong. So if you're in that position and you're a good member of staff, then you'll have that relationship with the children, and you should be more involved. But at the moment, quite often, the laddo's chairing the meeting, the social worker, who quite often probably don't know the child very well because they've only just picked the case up, and we all know the problem we've got with turnover of staff and suddenly they're in the meeting with a social worker who's never met the child, who's there to investigate, and they may be a quality member of staff. I'm not knocking them because they've done a lot of investigations, and some of the stuff I talked about earlier about how you ask a child, how you talk to a child, they should have done it, and they should have experience of children with special needs as well. They'll build that experience up, but they'll not. It depends where they are in the career path, and the managers above them. But I still think that we should be looking carefully. And there may be a teacher who's got a real close connection with the child, and they should be pulled in and be part of the investigation, because understanding what the child's saying is the first, when I talked about who's making the allegation, what are they saying? What are they saying is very, very important. Let's understand what they're actually saying, not just the words that are being bandied about to start with, because, somebody's overheard it, or they told the teacher, who's told the head teacher, who's then reported it in. And I'm not being critical, that's life. They used to say, what were it, Century and 6, we're going to a dance. If you remember the old saying, it can quite happen. And I've had it happen. I've had it happen in my career. So you've got to be clear what is being said and what is the corroboration on what's being said.
One of the areas we've been focusing on recently, and this is where I bring up Dr. David Gilbert, we've been working quite closely on FASD in the criminal justice system. And when a young adult is brought into the custody suite, there's a practice in place, or there should be, and this is what we're encouraging, is that there is somebody that straight away is, if they report that they have FASD, then an appropriate responsible party is brought in to sit with that individual. You mentioned Canada earlier. In Canada, they have an FASD court and a procedure in place where people are able to sit with that individual and ask them the questions that are not leading questions, that are not filling in the gaps for them, and asking them, as you said, in the appropriate way. Now, we need to have that in place. But first of all, you know, Tracy and I will tell you that many, many social workers still don't understand FASD. We still get a lot of people within the care system saying, what is FASD? So if they don't understand FASD, they're not going to understand that child, even if they're, you mentioned earlier about a social worker within a local authority that has just moved on and they've got a new social worker taking over that caseload, and all of a sudden they're brought into the equation and having to do the interview or talk on behalf of that young person.
Well, let me make it worse. If you're a social worker and you start work on Monday and you're taking over from people, and the manager says, I'm going to allocate 8 cases, and we'll because you need to get hold of them. And one's in court tomorrow. You've got a case conference on another one on Wednesday that's already booked in. This is real world stuff. Where's the time for the social worker to pick up the case and read everything about the history, about why the child's in care, about whether they've got fetal alcohol or special needs or whatever? It's not. And I have been raising over the last 30 years that social workers are having to run blind, and they're making decisions on contact with birth families and other issues which are vital and without the real knowledge, because they're the 8th or the 10th social worker down the line from when this child were brought into care. And I mean, the reason I personally came away from Kent County Council is because they went down the same path as every other local authority, where they have an intake assessment team and a long-term team, and then they swap social workers if they've got special needs, and social workers do not have chance to build up relationships with their children because the system doesn't let them, because we're swapping social workers constantly. So in a situation like this, the social workers trying to do their best, but have they, I go back to the jigsaw. How many pieces of the jigsaw have they not got? And it's not their fault. It's just the system's buggering them, really.
And then in the meantime, the foster families are cast adrift and feel undervalued as professionals, as we say. We've got a question come up here. I'm a defence solicitor in crime who works on behalf of the Fostering Network, and I am a duty solicitor. My experience is that very few police officers even know what FASD is, and the AA are not trained in this area.
That's
Fostering Network, can you urge your members to ring the helpline at the earliest opportunity if an allegation is made, as we're here to help? Thanks. And I think, you mentioned that the Fostering Network is the network of support, and they have policies in place and they have support networks in place immediately. So you don't have to be cast adrift. I think this is one of the messages to come across, isn't it?
I have to say there's also the relatively new trade union for foster carers as well, who are very good at giving legal support in a situation like this, and will attend things with carers. That's not me saying go and join the union. I'm just saying that. So the fostering networks there, I've always paid for all our carers to be supported by them, because where does that support come from? But also, it comes down to different agencies. I mean, my personal agency, the first thing I did when we started up is we've got a totally independent social worker who's got donkey's years of experience of being a guardian ad litem, running therapeutic fostering agencies. He's not employed direct, he's on a retainer, but he is his number's known to all our carers, and if they've got a complaint or they feel they're not being supported, there's somebody that they can go to who's out on a wing, really, just waiting for people to call so that he can support and help them. Now, I'm not aware that that happens very often, but I feel that it's really important that people get the support from independent sources, because it's very difficult for fostering agencies, because they've got to work with local authorities to protect children, and if it's a fine line to tread. You're trying to wear two hats. That's the bottom line. So I think it's important that we have independent people to support our carers.
We've got another question that's coming. I'm going to put this to Tracy. What support is there for adopters when they have allegations against them?
Well, personally, from what I get from the feedback from adopters, there's not a lot of support.
No.
Not at all. Obviously, like say for instance, like Andrew says, you've got fostering network. If you're a shared lives carer, you've got the shared lives network, so you've got other, but as an you can go back to your adoption agency maybe, or you can go back to say Adoption Partnership South East and ask for support. But a lot of people feel quite isolated
Yes.
and alone and don't have that extra work. Just going back to one thing that Andrew was saying also is around, when that initial allegation happens, part of one of the roles that I've done in the past is family group conferencing. Now, to me, if I had a magic wand and we could make this a little bit better for our young people, is within the foster agencies, you've got a network of support. Usually it's your circle of support. So, rather than them going to emergency respite with maybe strangers or whatever and be removed, surely the first port of call would be somebody within that network so they can go to in a way where they can have a safe place away from the family, but it's not unnatural.
Yeah.
And also that person can maybe be part of that communication and advocacy when maybe the advisory or the social worker comes in. And like Andrew was saying, bringing an independent social worker in to work with the actual family members, to me, would be fine. Because we're adults, we're professionals. So, having a new person to come and listen to our story would probably be quite refreshing, if I'm being honest. But that young person to keep with the same social worker, maybe with some of the network that they've already got around them, helping them. Because I know of families at the moment that are struggling where their young people are in not fostering, but like come out of fostering and are now in emergency respite. And that person is really struggling, isolated, feeling rejected, feeling they've done something wrong by verbalizing something, want to go back, sorry, but they can't.
It's too far down the line at that point.
Too far down the line, so it's really hard.
I think that is certainly something that's been heard, because there is the movement at the moment is to make sure that there's real consideration. Because by moving, I can understand the argument to move the child while the investigation takes place. But within that equation has to be, what is the allegation? Because if it's only a small allegation that you wouldn't move the child, even if it were found, you wouldn't move the child out. And why are you moving the child out while you do that investigation? Because moving children out of their home is damaging.
And this also brings up a bit of a question for me is, what makes an allegation and what makes something that's just, it's a bit of hearsay, it's a little bit of banter, it's a little bit of confrontation, or they're just really a bit fed up at the moment? Is it what would be classed as a criminal act? Would that be a proper full-on allegation, or are we looking at something else? I mean, Andrew, you're a bit frozen at the moment, so I'm going to put that to Tracy.
I mean, within my business, we if there's an allegation raised, so we go through some stages within our policy to start to look at, what is the allegation? Let's do some investigation, what I would say in the initial stages, to look at where's it coming from, what is being communicated, trying to not put words in their mouth, just take the facts.
Yeah.
Take the facts, log the facts and everything else. And then, within our team, we would look and think, right, okay, this needs to be escalated. Sometimes it could be something very minor that we might put in a file and that's logged there. and we don't feel it needs to be escalated. But then if that happened again, and maybe there was something else, you're building this picture, then all of a sudden you might think, actually, this isn't coincidence, this isn't something else. We do maybe need to look at this differently and have some more communication with the family. If they're struggling, is there something else going on? You know, why are these bruises happening, or why are these things being said? And then, you know, the last resort in some respects would be then escalating it to that level where we do feel that it needs to have that extra level of investigation.
Yes. I'll bring it to you, Andrew. I was asking, what defines the term an allegation above a bit of banter or a comment that's just come out? Because
that's down to the individual. I've been, people contacted me and said, we've got an allegation that this carer swore at this child. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want carers swearing at children, but I wouldn't see that as an abusive allegation, and that to me is something that we need to be working with the carer and saying that's not appropriate. And like you were saying, if that's a regular occurrence, then we've got an issue that we need to work with the carer on and take a bit more action. But it really is, it's so difficult, this subject, 'cause it's such a continuum. But it's down to, some of it's common sense, whether we like it or not. It's about, is that really going to affecting that child in such a negative way that they should lose their home? That's the first question you should be asking. But we must not lose sight. We've got people out there who weasel their way into being foster carers who are abusive people, unfortunately, and it's trying to spot them. Luckily, they are a real minority, so we should always bear that in mind.
Listen, Andrew, thank you so much for giving your experience here today as well. I think it's a subject that, as I said in some of the stats that were there, that it's one of the feared aspects, the biggest feared aspect in fostering, and it does impact on people's daily lives. But there are recommendations that can help support that. And I think we also need to be very aware as well about your good practice at home. Your good practice at home. Keep a good practice in place. Keep your diaries up to scratch. But also, if you're an adoptive family as well, we recommend, particularly within the FASD community, make your notes, put in your notes, because the more notes that you have that you can then refer to your pediatrician when you're looking at a diagnosis, or when you're looking with further assessments. If you've got your notes, all these things are very helpful. If there's regular examples of confabulation, report those in as well. If there's reports of suggestibility, if, for example, at school within the EHCP, that is a good place for being able to evidence this information, because if there was, heaven forbid for you, an allegation, you have a catalogue of evidence that you can refer back to that will help you in your process as well. So can I just say a big thank you to Tracy and a big thank you to Andrew. And we hope this has gone some way to helping you in your futures in foster care or care of an individual with learning difficulties. Hopefully we'll see you next month, and we've got a whole line of great guests over the coming months that will be able to give us further insights into living alongside FASD. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Andrew. Good night to you.
Cheers.